Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we are tackling this research paper. Where did all the animals go? And, well, let me tell you, it's a pretty intense read. I mean, right off the bat, it throws out this stat that species are disappearing at like 1,000 times the natural rate.
Wow.
Which is, I mean, that's not just like, oh, a little concerning. That's like full-on crisis mode.
That's a major red flag right there.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Are you ready to kind of jump into this?
Absolutely. I think it's something that we really need to be talking about more.
Okay, cool. So I've heard this term before, like the Anthropocene apocalypse.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, like it's always felt kind of abstract to me. Like, yeah, okay, humans are impacting the planet, but what does that actually look like, you know?
Yeah.
How does this research help us understand what that actually means for, life on Earth?
Yeah, well, we are currently experiencing the Earth's 6th mass extinction event.
Yeah.
And it's not because of a giant asteroid or volcanic eruptions this time. It's us. And to help kind of put that into perspective, think about it this way. You're at a concert, a packed stadium, just full of life and noise and energy, and suddenly 60% of the people just vanish, like right in front of you.
Oh, wow.
That's the scale of what we've lost in biodiversity in just the last 50 years.
Okay, so that is a pretty terrifying way to visualize it, and I'm guessing it's not just like, the big charismatic animals disappearing either, like the elephants and the types.
Oh, not at all. This extinction event is impacting everything. Plants, animals, entire ecosystems. We're seeing it in the alarming decline of coral reefs, for example. The research suggests they could be completely gone by 2050 if the oceans keep warming at this rate. And then the forests, disappearing at a rate that's just hard to even fathom.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's like we're systematically dismantling the fabric of life on Earth.
It really is.
Okay, so I remember from some other articles I've read that amphibians are kind of like the poster children for this crisis. Why is that?
Well, they're incredibly sensitive to changes in their environment. You can almost think of them like the canaries in a coal mine, early warning system.
Gotcha.
The fact that nearly 40% of amphibian species are at risk of extinction should be a huge red flag for all of us. It tells us that something is deeply wrong with the planet's health and that we need to start paying attention.
So it's not just about like, oh, we might lose a few frogs. It's more about understanding the interconnectedness of all life and how their decline is really a warning sign for the health of the whole planet.
It's precisely. And the sheer number of species at risk is truly staggering. The research estimates over 1 million species are on the verge of disappearing.
Wow.
That's 1 in every 8 plants and animals on Earth.
1 in 8? I mean, that's like if every time you went for a walk in nature, you knew 1 out of every 8 plants or creatures you saw might be gone tomorrow. That's hard to wrap your head around.
It is. It's a very sobering thought. It really highlights the urgency of the situation. And unfortunately, some species are being targeted even more aggressively than others, pushing them even closer to the brink.
Right. Yeah, the research goes into some detail about the illegal wildlife trade, and I gotta admit, I was shocked by what I learned about pangolins.
Oh, yeah, they're fascinating creatures. The only mammals with scales.
Oh.
And tragically, those scales are in high demand for traditional medicine. Their meat is considered a delicacy.
Oh, wow.
And it's this demand that has made them the most trafficked mammal in the world.
That's mind-blowing. I mean, before reading this research, I honestly couldn't have even told you what a pangolin was. It makes you realize how many species are out there silently struggling for survival without the kind of attention that elephants or rhinos get.
Yeah, that's a really important point. This isn't just about the charismatic megafauna, the big animals that everyone knows and loves. It's about recognizing the value and interconnectedness of all life, even the creatures we may not even be aware of.
Right. And it's not just poaching and trafficking driving this decline either, right? What are some of the other major factors that the research highlights?
Well, there's a whole web of interconnected factors, and many of them stem from human activities. Habitat loss is huge. As we expand our footprint, we're encroaching on the spaces that countless species depend on.
So we're literally squeezing them out of existence.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And then there's pollution, which is, that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah. We could probably do a whole deep dive just on pollution.
Definitely could.
But, okay, so for the sake of time today, what are some of the key things that this research focuses on when it comes to pollution?
I would say the 2 major types they really focus on are plastic and greenhouse gases.
Okay. Plastic first, I guess.
Yeah.
I think we're all aware of the plastic problem in the oceans. Those horrifying images of sea turtles tangled in plastic bags.
Yeah.
And all that. But the research suggests it's even more insidious than that, right?
It is. Those images are certainly powerful, and they do highlight the problem. But what's even more alarming is the pervasiveness of microplastics. These tiny particles are essentially everywhere, in the water, in the soil, and as the research points out, even in the food chain.
So we're literally eating our own trash.
In a way, yes. Fish consume microplastics. We eat fish. It's a stark reminder that there's no away when it comes to waste.
Right. It all comes back to us eventually.
Exactly.
Okay, that's pretty disturbing. All right, so then there's greenhouse gases, which obviously contribute to climate change. But honestly, we hear about that so much, it almost starts to feel like background noise.
I know what you mean.
So how does this research kind of help us connect that to the loss of biodiversity
Yeah.
in a way that feels real and urgent?
Well, I think the example of polar bears really drives it home. The research talks about how rising temperatures are melting sea ice, which is, the very platform that polar bears rely on for hunting seals.
Oh, right.
As that ice disappears, they're literally starving to death.
So it's not just a gradual warming trend. It's directly impacting their ability to survive.
Exactly. And that's just one example. Climate change is messing with migration patterns, throwing off seasonal cycles, and altering habitats in ways that countless species just can't adapt to fast enough.
Right. Okay, well, I'm definitely feeling that sense of urgency now.
Mhm.
But the research doesn't just leave us in a pit of despair, does it? There's also a section on solutions, right? Like things we can actually do.
There is. And it's actually quite hopeful. One of the most encouraging findings is that we could potentially prevent up to 70% of projected extinctions by protecting just 30% of land and ocean habitats.
Wait, just 30%? That seems
Yeah,
achievable.
It does. It really highlights the power of targeted conservation efforts.
Totally.
And the research gives this fascinating example of wolves being reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park back in the 1990s.
Oh, yeah. I think I've heard about that. Didn't they have like a surprisingly dramatic impact on the whole ecosystem?
They did. It's a classic example of rewilding. When the wolves were removed from Yellowstone decades earlier, the elk population just exploded, which led to overgrazing.
Right.
And that had this cascade effect on everything.
Ah.
The vegetation suffered, the soil eroded, even the rivers started changing course because the banks weren't stabilized by plant roots anymore.
Wow. I had no idea it was all connected like that. So reintroducing the wolves basically put things back into balance.
Exactly. The wolves preyed on the elk, bringing their population back down to a healthy level. This allowed the vegetation to recover the soil to stabilize and the rivers to flow naturally again. It's a perfect example of how even seemingly small changes can have this ripple effect throughout an entire ecosystem.
Okay. That's pretty inspiring. But obviously we can't just reintroduce wolves everywhere. So what are some other things the research suggests we can do?
Well, something that might surprise people is how much of an impact our dietary choices can have. Specifically, the research points to meat consumption as a major contributor to the problem. Did you know that livestock production is responsible for almost 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions?
Really? That's more than all the cars and planes combined.
It is.
So you're saying that even just cutting back on meat could make a difference?
Absolutely. Even shifting towards a more plant-based diet a few times a week can significantly reduce your environmental impact.
Okay. So that's something we can all do on a personal level. But the research also emphasizes that individual action alone isn't enough, right?
That's right. We need systemic change.
Right.
We need to hold corporations accountable for their environmental practices, support policies that protect biodiversity, and elect leaders who understand the urgency of the situation and are willing to act.
Right. Okay, so we talked about plastic a bit ago, and I know you said we could spend a whole deep dive talking about it, but what does this research recommend we do about it? Is recycling enough?
Recycling is definitely a step in the right direction, but it's not a complete solution. We need to reduce our reliance on single-use plastics, support initiatives that promote sustainable packaging, and demand more responsible production and waste management practices from corporations.
So it's about being more conscious consumers and making sure our voices are heard by those in power. Okay, so beyond those big picture solutions, is there anything the research suggests we can do on a more individual level? Like something tangible,
Actually, there is. The research talks about the simple act of planting something.
Wait, really? Like planting a tree or a flower
Oh.
How does that help?
Well, plants absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, helping to mitigate climate change. They also provide habitat and food for countless species, contributing to biodiversity. And on a more symbolic level, it's a way to connect with nature, foster a sense of stewardship for the planet, and maybe even inspire others to do the same.
So you're saying don't underestimate the power of a single seed.
Exactly. Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to a solution.
Okay. It's good to end on a note of hope. But I gotta admit, thinking about the sheer scale of this crisis and the fact that the research suggests it can take 10 million years for biodiversity to recover after a mass extinction, it can feel pretty overwhelming.
It is a daunting reality.
Yeah.
But we can't let that paralyze us. We have a choice to make. We can either succumb to despair or we can choose to act. Every action we take, no matter how small, is a vote for a future where both humanity and nature can thrive.
So what do we do with all this information? It's easy to feel like one person can't possibly make a difference.
It's true. The challenges are massive. But remember, we're not alone in this. There are countless individuals and organizations working tirelessly to protect biodiversity. We can join their efforts, support their work, and amplify their message. Even small actions multiplied by millions of people can create a powerful force for change.
So it's about finding those points of connection, those places where our individual actions can contribute to a larger movement. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, we'll dive into some more specific solutions and actions we can all take. So stay tuned. All right, so we're back. And before the break, we were talking about, this feeling of being overwhelmed by the scale of the biodiversity crisis. But we were also starting to touch on some potential solutions. So, I don't know, maybe we can dive into that a little bit more. Like, what are some tangible things people can actually do?
Yeah, absolutely. So beyond those individual actions like reducing meat consumption and planting trees, the research also really emphasizes the need for systemic change.
Okay.
Which can feel even more daunting.
Yeah. Like, how do we even begin to tackle that?
Well, it starts with recognizing that this isn't just an environmental issue. It's a social justice issue, an economic issue, a political issue. It's all interconnected. So we need to start pushing for change at all levels.
So, like, what does that actually look like?
Well, for one thing, we need to hold corporations accountable for their environmental practices. Demand transparency in their supply chains. Support businesses that are prioritizing sustainability. And divest from those that aren't.
Right. Vote with our dollars, basically.
Exactly.
Okay, and then what about on, the policy level?
Well, we need to elect leaders who understand the urgency of the situation and are willing to take bold action to address it.
So, support policies that protect biodiversity, incentivize renewable energy.
Exactly. Things like carbon taxes, investing in public transportation, protecting endangered species and their habitats.
Okay, so it sounds like it's really about using our voices and our votes to push for change.
It is. We need to make it clear to those in power that this is a priority, that we won't stand for inaction.
So it's not just about individual actions, it's about collective action.
Precisely. We need to build a movement of people who understand the interconnectedness of all life and are willing to fight for a future where both humanity and nature can thrive.
So how do we actually build that movement?
Well, it starts with education and awareness. Having conversations like this one, sharing information with our friends and families, getting involved in local conservation efforts, and supporting organizations that are working to protect biodiversity.
So it's about finding those points of connection, those places where our individual actions can contribute to a larger movement.
Exactly. And it's also about remembering that we're not alone in this. There are countless people all over the world who are passionate about this issue and are working to make a difference.
So we just need to find each other and work together.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've talked about a lot of pretty heavy stuff today. But I want to end on a note of hope, because despite the challenges we're facing, I still believe that we have the power to turn things around.
I agree.
So what are some things that give you hope?
Well, for one thing, I'm constantly inspired by the resilience of nature. Even in the face of incredible adversity, life finds a way. And I'm also hopeful because I see more and more people waking up to the urgency of this crisis, especially young people. They're demanding change. They're not willing to accept the status quo.
Yeah, that's definitely a reason for optimism.
It is. And ultimately, I believe that we have the ingenuity and the creativity to solve this problem. We just need the collective will to do it.
So it's not a question of whether we can do it. It's a question of whether we will do it.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the sobering reality of the biodiversity crisis to the hopeful potential of solutions. And I hope that our listeners out there are feeling both informed and empowered. So thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. It's a powerful reminder that we're all part of this, much larger web of life. you know?
Yeah.
And even though the scale of this crisis can feel super daunting, it sounds like the research is ultimately like a call to action, not a reason to just give up hope.
Exactly. We can choose to be overwhelmed by the enormity of the challenge, or we can choose to see it as an opportunity to reconnect with nature, to reevaluate our relationship with the planet, and to become active participants in creating a more sustainable future.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I want to shift gears a bit and ask you a more personal question. Like, what does biodiversity mean to you on a deeper level?
That's a great question. I think for me, biodiversity is about the sheer wonder and beauty of life on Earth. It's about the incredible diversity of species, from the tiniest insects to the largest whales, each playing a vital role in this intricate web of life.
Yeah.
It's about the interconnectedness of all living things and the recognition that our own well-being is inextricably linked to the health of the planet.
I think you've really captured something important there, that sense of wonder and interconnectedness. It's easy to get lost in like the doom and gloom of statistics and projections and all that, but ultimately this is about protecting something precious, something irreplaceable.
Absolutely. And for me, it's also about recognizing that we have a moral obligation to be good stewards of the planet, not just for our own sake, but for the sake of all the other species who call this planet home.
Right.
It's about understanding that we're not just inhabitants of this Earth, we're caretakers.
Oh, okay. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the sobering reality of the sixth mass extinction to the hopeful potential of solutions like rewilding and conscious consumption and all that. But as we leave our listener with all of this to ponder, what's that one final thought, that one lingering question you'd like them to take away from our conversation?
I think the most important question we can ask ourselves is this: what kind of legacy do we want to leave behind? Do we want to be remembered as the generation that stood by and watched as the tapestry of life unraveled? Or do we want to be the generation that rose to the challenge, that chose action over apathy, and that helped to create a future where both humanity and nature can thrive?
That's a powerful question to end on. A real call to action for each of us to find our own place in this story, in this fight for the future of life on Earth.
Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this deep dive. I think we all learned a lot today.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners out there, we hope this conversation has sparked your curiosity and maybe even ignited a little bit of that fighting spirit. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep